Confirmation bias, how to recognize it and how to be delivered from it. Hi, welcome to today's lesson, and thank you so much for joining me once again here on my back porch on this lovely sunshiny morning here near Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. I'm about 20 minutes from Punxsutawney, the weather capital of the world, where a groundhog comes up once a year and somehow he's able to predict how much more lousy weather we're about to experience here in Pennsylvania. Anyways, if you've been watching Little Lessons, the last 3 little lessons I've been talking about narcissism and how it's so tempting for people who have been offended by other selfish people to label those offending people as narcissists. And I've tried to recommend some caution in loosely using the term narcissist and narcissism, because there is a definition within the psychological world, the world of psychology, that has some very strict criteria. And unfortunately, it's becoming a very popular term. Anybody that's selfish, we're so quick to label them a narcissist. Because, why? Because that confirms our biases. So I want to talk about, on this lesson, that very phenomena of confirmation bias. That is, all of us are biased to some degree, more or less, on just about everything, okay? We have our preferences, our likes, our dislikes, our inclinations, and we recognize that the worst forms of confirmation bias are things like racial prejudice. When you've already made up your mind because of the color of somebody's skin, something that you've decided about what they're actually like, even before you get to know them. And so then you look for, you search for, you seek for what confirms your bias. And I'm not using the word your to point my finger at you. We all are guilty of that, more or less, because once you've decided something, we are insecure, we want to feel that we are right in our judgments, and so then we look for what confirms our bias. And so that's what, for example, that's one reason for the political strife that we're seeing right now in our own country, because the two sides, conservative and liberal, have become even more polarized than historically they were. And why is that? Because of confirmation bias. We don't listen to the other side. We only go to websites, for example, that confirm our bias. I'm conservative, and so I only look at conservative websites that put down liberal thought. And I'm liberal, and so I don't listen to that nonsense on the conservative websites. And did you know that the search engines, for example, most people use Google, but based upon what they've learned about you from your past searches, they know what's interesting to you and your particular bent, political leanings, what you like, what you dislike, and so forth. So if you began typing something into the search bar, it's not just arbitrarily, randomly looking for, neutral articles on whatever topic you're about. It takes other factors into consideration, and as you start, typing a few words in there, it'll make suggestions for you. And that's based on your own history, okay? And so you might get a different search result than somebody else because of what they already know about what you're looking for. You're looking to confirm your bias. Isn't that scary? And so that ultimately makes us more polarized than we ever were before, because the information that we're being fed from our Google searches confirms us. It confirms my political tendencies, and it confirms a person who has a different political tendency. The opposite, as a matter of fact. And there was a really interesting documentary done. I forget who did it. I think maybe it was Netflix. And I'm not a subscriber, by the way, to Netflix, but I was able to watch this documentary by, I don't know if I temporarily subscribed or somehow. But It was called The Social Dilemma, and it's a documentary, and a lot of it is interviews of people that designed all the social media and had a crisis of conscience about it because of the negative ramifications and consequences of reinforcing people's biases and polarizing people even more so. So we were doing confirmation bias. Confirmation bias existed long before Google and these other social media platforms. People gather in groups. They form friendships, oftentimes based upon social bias. I gravitate towards people who agree with me, because they confirm my bias. And so we form these little cults or cultures. And that is why that if you want to persuade someone to an alternative viewpoint, to consider a different viewpoint, the way to do it is often not with the facts, because people, they don't say this, but, here's the truth of the matter. Don't confuse me with facts. I've already made up my mind. A better way of saying that is, don't confuse me with facts, because that disagrees with what me and my friends think. You see, because as people think of alternative viewpoints, they think, if I adopted that viewpoint, all my friends would reject me. And so the way to persuade somebody, first off, is not with facts, or, and the stupidest people present facts insultingly and condescendingly, they never win anybody to their side. People are much more concerned about what everybody thinks about me. That's the most important thing. People want to be loved and accepted. Everybody has some group of friends with whom they share something in common. Oftentimes it is political or spiritual viewpoints, or, something or other they hold in common. And they're not going to entertain anything that contradicts what the group believes, because that would get them kicked out of the group. I'd lose all my friends if I became a Republican or a Democrat, And so I'm not about to do that. And so the way to persuade people to consider a different side is to become their friend. Take them out for lunch or breakfast or dinner, or invite them to your house. And you know that the conversations become so much more civil face to face than they do when they're comments on a social media platform. I can't believe some of the things, that I at one time was fairly active on Facebook, and I accumulated all these friends who, many of them would never have been my friends in real life. And they would not hesitate to put the most insulting comments to something that I posted. I don't even know who these people are. They're my Facebook friends. But they're not my friends. I would never have them as friends in real life, because they're so demeaning and condescending and insulting. So the way to persuade someone to your view is, and you can't do this on a large scale, can you? No. You can do it on a very small scale. Have them over for dinner, or go out and have a meal. And then face to face, it becomes so much more civil. On a social media platform, or, one of those other means that we have, chat rooms, and so forth, you can shoot your bazooka and then, walk away. When you're at a meal, you realize, well, I gotta last till dessert. I don't want to, upset someone so much that they storm out of the restaurant or leave my home. And so we're forced to use a little more grace in our communications. You can only have so many friends, and so if you're trying to persuade someone, you have to establish a rapport with them so that they'll consider you. They have to consider you once you're a friend. They can't just write you off, because nobody wants to lose all their friends and be a lone ranger in the universe of opinion. Okay? And, I unfriend all those people that don't agree with me. Yeah, that's confirmation bias. You don't want anybody in your circle. This also is a component of what's been called groupthink. It's a form of confirmation bias. So you have a group that everybody's friendships is friends, but they're a group like they are, for example, a working committee at a business or in a government or in a nonprofit or something. And the most important thing in everyone's mind subconsciously is the camaraderie of the group. We all want to get along. I find this in nonprofits quite frequently, and it's very commonplace because Christians are supposed to get along. And so I remember one time a church that they, in their bylaws, they required that all decisions made by the elders had to be unanimously decided. Because, you know, we all have the Holy Spirit and God only has one plan. And if we're all listening to the Holy Spirit, then, you know, we're all going to agree. And so if there was a dissenting member, they'd all say, well, we have to go back to prayer, you know, and God has to change somebody. And of course, sometimes, here's the problem. You get a Dumbo, hard-headed, you know, shallow-brained person who thinks they're sure they're hearing from the Holy Spirit, who disagrees with everybody else, you know, but I'm hearing from the Holy Spirit, they say, and that causes tension. Well, isn't it amazing that, you know, the non-Christians have more sense than that, because they decide things by majority rule, and it's only civil for the ones that lose in the minority to yield to the majority opinion. And that's how they do it, like at the Supreme Court, don't they? You have these 5-4 decisions. So you can still write your dissenting opinion as a Supreme Court justice, but, you know, the law of the land is what the majority decided. All right, so in groupthink, the camaraderie is important. They might not even have decided that it has to be everything has to be unanimous. But if you read the board minutes of a nonprofit organization and every decision is, you know, unanimous, well, what you've got is groupthink there. Because we want to preserve the unity. We want to be friends. I don't want to be looked at as the oddball, you know. And so people compromise and people yield to the stronger personalities and wind up groupthink. And groupthink then is defined as a group that makes a bad decision. They all think alike because we all want to get along. The classic example of groupthink, I think it was, I forget which Apollo mission it was, but it was when the O-rings, it was a space shuttle mission, I'm sorry, when the O-rings on the booster rocket gave out, and there were certain scientists at NASA who were strongly advising that, hey, don't blast this thing off if the outside temperature is below a certain point, because these O-rings are likely to fail and you have an explosion. But you can watch a YouTube video on that. And it was the classic example of groupthink, where the group eventually all decided, yeah, go ahead and launch. And I forget how many astronauts lost their lives in that space shuttle disaster, all because of faulty O-rings that certain people warned against. But, you know, there were dominant personalities within the committees making the decisions, and the weaker ones eventually yielded and so forth, because we want to get along and nobody wants to be the oddball, you know, and so everybody then got on board. Why don't you get on board? Well, I don't get on board because there's lots of examples in the Bible of groups that made stupid decisions. And the minority oftentimes was the right ones, like Joshua and Caleb said, we can go in and take the land. The majority in groupthink said, no, we can't. And there's lots of examples in the Bible of groupthink, okay? And it's all based on, you know, basically confirmation bias. And of course, we want to be loved and accepted. Okay, well, that's something to think about. And for Christians, we want to be honest and truthful and always do what's right, even if it puts us in the minority, because we're already in the minority, being followers of Jesus. But sometimes doing the right thing puts you in the minority of the Christians. A lot of times, I should say, the professing Christians. And it's no fun. being ostracized. That's why there's denominations. That's why, like one time I jokingly said, but actually I meant it. If you're not getting enough persecution as a Christian, well, then just question the doctrine of your denomination or your doctrinal group, because groups form around doctrine and nobody's allowed to question the status quo. And if you do, look out, buddy. You'll be crucified. And you just, it's no fun going through that. But God sees. That's always a comfort to know. God sees. And he's keeping track. And you and God make a majority. Okay, just make sure that you're right. And that doesn't mean that that it's not true that in an abundance of counselors there is wisdom, but there are plenty of examples in the Bible of groups that made the wrong decision. And the minority was in the right and the majority was in the wrong. Okay, so you have to make sure that you're right. So humbly pray and ask maybe people that you trust who are also, less susceptible to groupthink and confirmation bias. It's really good to listen to constructive criticism if you can find anybody who loves you enough who will give you constructive criticism. Most people who are the critics they take some perverse pleasure in putting other people down and hurting them. But I'm talking about a loving person who will offer you constructive criticism. If you have one of those persons in your life, you're blessed. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. All right, well, that's enough for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've never visited one of our websites, we've got two of them. One is davidservant.org. Loads of teaching there on many different topics. I've said in previous little lessons, I think I'll mention it again. As I'm filming this, I've been working on a book titled Sex is for Christians, and we've been publishing it every month as I come out with new chapters, working right now on chapter 8. A lot of interesting stuff there, and I'm broaching subjects that are, often avoided within Christian circles. So you can read it without fear, and it's all free. Okay, so check out davidservant.org or .com. They both take you to the same place. Until next time, may the Lord continue to bless you.